Well, thank you so much, Steve, for kicking us off with a prayer. I want to thank everybody that's here for being here. It's so good to be together. I've been texting with Kurt. I haven't talked to him live yet. According to his text messages, he's a little loopy from the medication, so I think he's afraid of what he might say. But his text messages are legible, so that's a good sign. And we've been communicating, but my understanding from him is that he's coming along really well, and just obviously needs a little more time to continue to recover. So normally Kurt does most of the teaching on Wednesdays, and we split up the Sundays. He does about 75%, and I preach about once a month. But with this series, we kind of front loaded the Kurt because we knew he was getting the surgery, and now I'm going to be doing several lessons in a row, and then Kurt will take us home in about a week and a half after he recovers. So we're tag teaming just in a different way. So you get a lot of Kurt, a lot of me, and then a lot of Kurt again. So hopefully that doesn't throw anybody off. We're going to start off tonight with your favorite part of our midweek lessons. I know this is everybody's favorite. People text me, call me. They send skywriters to my house and tell me that they love the weekly quiz. They just can't wait for the weekly quiz. It makes them so happy. So we're going to start with our weekly quiz, and we'll kick off there with that. So just you got to answer the poll, and we'll go from there. So let's see. Let's start with the first question. Dun, dun, dun. In which book of the Bible would you find the earliest reference to the specific do's and don'ts for future kings of Israel? All right, we got about a couple more people. Chime in. We're going to close out. Dun, 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 dun. Okay, let's end the polling. The most popular answer was also the correct answer, is the book of Deuteronomy. However, God introduced the idea of kings earlier on. Even in Joshua, he mentions, he repeats the promise, and he does kind of give a kind of a half warning saying, if you stay faithful. So I guess I understand why some people put Joshua. But in Deuteronomy, he lays out specific parameters, like when you get a king, don't let him do this, don't let him do this, don't let him do this, don't let him do this. So excellent job. Oh, I didn't show the results. That's my fault. I can see them. Ha, ha, ha. Now you can see them. My fault there. It's normally when Kurt is doing this, I'm running the back end, and, I can focus on the tech. Tonight, I got to do it all. So there will be technical difficulties tonight. I'm going to own that, but I'm just saying, I'm multitasking, so I'm just going to give it as an excuse. All right, let's go ahead and move forward with the next question. Which of the following is not true in regard to David's kingship? He refused to take matters into his own hands in removing King Saul. His son Solomon succeeded him as king. He was the first choice of Samuel upon arriving to visit David's family. He was the son of Jesse from the tribe of Judah. Which of the following is not true? Okay, we got almost everybody in. If you haven't decided yet, pick an answer, pick your guess, because we're going to end the polling here in a second. All right. So most people answered the correct answer. He was the first choice of Samuel upon arriving at David's family. Remember, Samuel arrived and he saw Eliab, who was strapping and tall, and he said, that must be it. And God said, no, that's not it. So let's go on to the next question, and we'll go from there. Let's see. In which book and chapter, so we got book, you don't need verse, but book and chapter of the Bible indicates that God doesn't look at the outward appearance the way most of the world does? Is that 2 Samuel chapter 16, Joshua chapter 24, 1 Samuel chapter 16, or Judges 21? We got about half the group answering, so I know that this is a tough one. Just go ahead and make a guess. If you don't know the answer, make a guess. We're almost there. Got several people in. He's got a couple more people. All right, I'm going to close out the question. So if you haven't answered yet, you lose your chance. All right. Over 52%, so over half, got it right. 1 Samuel 16, this is where God said, in the same story we read about in the previous question, God essentially rebukes Samuel. He says, listen, I don't look at the outward appearance like man does. I look at the heart. And that's a beautiful scripture, beautiful passage, beautiful kind of glimpse into God's perspective on us today. A couple more quiz questions, and then we will move forward with our lesson. Let's see. In 1 Kings 3, Solomon prayed a specific prayer that pleased the Lord. What did Solomon pray for? Did he pray for wealth, a long life, discernment in administering justice, or many wives? Almost everyone's answered. We need a couple more people chime in. All right. So most of everyone answered discernment in administering justice, which is the correct answer. The long life question was a little curveball because we had in the lesson on Sunday the story about Hezekiah who did pray that prayer. So not necessarily for a long life, but for an extension to his life at the end of 2 Kings. So that was a little bit of a curveball, but most everyone got this right. So excellent job with all of you there. Let's see. Question number 5. What was it that turned Solomon's heart after other gods? What was it that Solomon did that turned his heart after other gods? The loss of his son, his foreign wives, a famine in the land, or the loss of his wealth? Okay, 5 more seconds. If you don't know, just pop an answer, pop your best guess. All right. So most people answered his foreign wives, which is correct. Remember, it said in 1 Kings chapter 11 that he married these foreign women, 700 of them. And then as he got older, he started to worship their gods. And that's ultimately what led to the downfall of Israel. It's what led to God dividing the kingdom. And ultimately, Israel never really recovered from that trajectory that Solomon put them on by marrying those foreign women. Let's see. One more content question, and then we'll move forward with our lesson here. Because King Hezekiah had walked faithfully before the Lord, when he prayed he might not die, the Lord took him to heaven in a cloud, added 15 years to his life, sent an angel of mercy to kill him quickly, or none of the above. Okay, we're almost done. We got a couple more people need to chime in. Give it 5 more seconds here. If you haven't guessed yet, guess now. All right. So most people answered, 75% answered added 15 years to his life, which is the correct answer. Took him up to heaven in a cloud. Of course, that's not what happened to Hezekiah. Sent an angel of mercy to kill him quickly. That's not what happened to Hezekiah. And then none of the above. That's interesting. I mean, some of the folks thought that because, some of these Bible stories can kind of merge together. But in the case of Hezekiah, as you remember from our lesson on Sunday, he prayed because he wanted to live, but more importantly, he wanted to stop the Assyrian invasion. And he felt very, very strongly that he was the man to do that. And God added 15 years to his life and delayed the Assyrian invasion for another 100 years before Judah was sent into exile. So it was a very good, excellent job. I think for the most part, everybody got most of the answers right. If you didn't get the answers right, hopefully you learned from answering wrong as we discussed what the right answer might be. On Sunday, for the introduction to 1st and 2nd Kings, I shared a video from the Bible Project. I got some good feedback that people liked that, and it helped get an overview. I'm going to do the same thing tonight, and this video actually covers Ezra and Nehemiah. Now, Nehemiah is our lesson slated for this coming Sunday. Tonight, we're just really going to dig into what led up to Ezra and the book of Ezra itself. And then Sunday, we'll review Nehemiah. And unfortunately, we won't have a video because we're watching it tonight. But we're going to kick off our lesson with this video from the Bible Project, which will hopefully kind of give you some base knowledge. You know, many of you have been disciples a long time. You've probably read Ezra and Nehemiah, but it may have been a while. So I hope this video kind of level sets and reminds you what the books are about, kind of the base understanding, and then we can go from there. So kick back and we'll watch this video.
The books of Ezra and Nehemiah. In most modern Bibles, these books are separate, but that division happened long after it was written. It was originally a unified work written by a single author. The story is set after the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem and its temple and took many of the people into exile. And this book picks up about 50 years later and tells the return of some Israelites to Jerusalem, and then what happened when they rebuilt the city and their lives there. Specifically, the book focuses on three key leaders who led the rebuilding efforts. You have Zerubbabel, then Ezra, and then Nehemiah. And the book's design focuses on the efforts of each leader. Zerubbabel leads a large group of people back to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple. Then about 60 years later, Ezra arrives in Jerusalem to teach the Torah and rebuild the community. And then he's followed by Nehemiah, who leads the rebuilding of Jerusalem's walls. And these three stories are designed to be parallel. Each begins with the king of Persia, prompted by God to send the leader to Jerusalem, and he offers resources and support, and then each leader encounters opposition in their efforts, which they then overcome, but in a way that leads to a strange anticlimax in each of the three parts. Let's back up and see how it fits together. So the story begins with a decree from Cyrus, the king of Persia, and he's moved by God to allow the exiles to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. And the author says this fulfills a promise made by the prophet Jeremiah that the exiles would one day return to Jerusalem. Now, this fulfillment should trigger our hopes in the many other prophetic promises that exile was not the end of the story. We have hope for a future messianic king from the line of David. We have hope for a rebuilt temple where God's presence will dwell with his people. Hope for God's kingdom to come over all the nations and bring his blessing, just like he promised to Abraham. And so it's with all these hopes in mind that we read on into the story of Zerubbabel. His name means planted in Babylon. He represents the generation born in Babylonian captivity, and he leads a wave of Israelites returning to Jerusalem. After they settle there, they rebuild the altar for offering sacrifices, and later the temple itself. The foundation-laying ceremony, and then the temple's final dedication, these are key moments. The past stories of the tabernacle and temple's dedication should be in our minds. This is when the fiery cloud of God's presence is supposed to descend. He's dwelling with his people, and it doesn't happen. And so while some people are happy about this new temple, the elders who had seen the previous temple of Solomon, they cry out in grief. It is nothing like their glorious past or their hopes for the future. And it's right here that we get the first story of opposition, and it's very odd. So the grandchildren of the Israelites who were not taken into exile, they had been living in Jerusalem all along, they come to offer help with the temple rebuilding. And Zerubbabel refuses. He says, "You have no part in our temple." And this, of course, generates a conflict, which Zerubbabel overcomes, but it's very strange, because the prophets had envisioned that the tribes of Israel would all come together, along with all of the nations, to participate in the worship of the God of Israel when the kingdom finally comes. So this is an anticlimactic moment, to say the least. In the next section, we zoom forward about 60 years and we're introduced to Ezra. He's a leader among the exiled Israelites in Babylon. And he's a Torah scholar and a teacher. And so he gets appointed by Artaxerxes, king of Persia, to lead another wave of people back to Jerusalem. And Ezra wants to bring about spiritual and social renewal among the people. Our hopes are high. And again, we come to another anticlimactic moment in the story. Ezra learns that many of the exiled Israelites that had come back, they had married non-exiles who had been living around Jerusalem. Some of them were non-Israelites, and almost certainly some of them were. Ezra then appeals to the commands of the Torah, that Israel was supposed to be holy and separate from the ancient Canaanites. And he then says that the people living around Jerusalem are like the Canaanites. They're going to corrupt the exiles. So Ezra offers a prayer of repentance, and it's very heartfelt. But then he rallies all the leaders and enacts this divorce decree that says all these marriages should be annulled, the women and children sent away. And then the decree is only partially carried out. We're given a list of some of the men who divorced their wives. The story is very strange for a number of reasons. First of all, God never commanded Ezra to do any of this. It was the leaders of Jerusalem who led Ezra to make the decree. Second, the contemporary prophet Malachi, he did say that the exiles should care about purity, but he also said that God was opposed to divorce. And so the mixed results of the decree, this all fits into this pattern of a strange concluding anticlimax. Which leads us to the next section about Nehemiah. He's an Israelite official serving in the Persian government, and when he hears about the ruined state of Jerusalem's walls, he prays and then gets permission from the Persian king Artaxerxes to go and rebuild the walls. The king even gives him an armed escort and all these resources. So after arriving in Jerusalem, he begins the building project, and he too faces opposition from the people who had already been living around Jerusalem. Once again, we face a tension in the story. The contemporary prophet Zechariah said that the new Jerusalem of God's kingdom would be a city without walls, that God's presence would surround it, that people from all nations would come and join the covenant people. But Nehemiah seems to operate with the opposite vision. He informs the people surrounding Jerusalem that they have no part in Jerusalem. And this, of course, provokes them to hostility. And so while Nehemiah carries out his vision for the city with integrity and courage, they have to build the city with armed guards to protect them. We keep wondering, could this whole conflict have been handled differently? And this all leads to the conclusion of the book. Two movements. First, positive. Ezra and Nehemiah combine forces to bring about a spiritual renewal among the people. They gather all the exiles together for a festival. They read and teach the Torah to all the people for 7 days. And then they celebrate the ancient Feast of Tabernacles to remember God's faithfulness from the Exodus and the wilderness journeys. Then they offer a confession of their sins. They vow themselves to renew the covenant, follow all the commands of the Torah. And they finish with a great celebration over the temple, the walls of Jerusalem. And we're thinking, this could be the turning point, but it's not. The book ends on a huge downer. Nehemiah tours around the city, and he finds that the people have not been fulfilling their covenant vows. So Zerubbabel's work is undone as he finds the temple being neglected and staffed by all these unqualified people. He then discovers that Ezra's work is being compromised. He finds everyone violating the Torah, people are working on the Sabbath, and even his own work on the walls is involved because people are setting up markets around the walls of Jerusalem and working on the Sabbath. So Nehemiah, he goes on a rampage. He's beating people up, he's pulling out their hair, and he's yelling, "Obey the commands of the Torah." And his final words are a prayer that God would remember him, that at least he tried, and the book ends. I mean, it's very strange, but we've been prepared for it, right? These anticlimactic moments have been woven into the book's design intentionally. And so it raises the question, what on earth does this book contribute to the storyline of the Bible? Well, remember, the book started by raising our hopes in the prophetic promises about the Messiah, the temple, the kingdom of God, and then none of it happens. So even though Israel is now back in the land, their spiritual state seems unchanged from before the exile. And while Ezra and Nehemiah, they do their best, but their political and social reforms among the people don't address the core issues of their heart. So what the book is pointing out is the same need highlighted by the prophets Jeremiah and Ezekiel. What God's people need is a holistic transformation of their hearts if they're ever going to love and obey their God. And so the book ends on a downer, yes, but it forces you to keep reading on into the wisdom and prophetic books to find out what is God going to do to fulfill his great covenant promises. But for now, that's the book of Ezra and Nehemiah.
All right. Hopefully you liked the little animation and you got the top level overview. And a lot of these will become reference points for us as we go through part of this tonight and more of this on Sunday. What we're going to do now is we're going to go through our handout that we emailed. And then after that, Patty is going to share about what she's been getting from the series so far. And then we'll dig into our content for tonight. So hopefully you received the handout either on email or you got it from the Facebook page. But I want to make sure that we, take time to actually print these things and review them. I knew Kurt put a lot of time into creating these. By the way, Kurt is not going. I found this out. I thought he just had all this stuff from like teaching it all over the years, and he was just pulling up files. And I wasn't. I'm like, okay, cool. We got a handout. He's creating this custom for you and for me every single week. So this week, he said, Aaron, you got to make a handout. I go, well, don't you have some stuff already done? He goes, no, I've been writing these every week. I'm like, wow, that's a lot of work. So there's a lot of investment of time and heart and desire that for us to really learn and grow. So hopefully you can take the time to review it, read it, and learn from it. Otherwise it's kind of fruitless labor. So the beginning of the handout, he just kind of reminds us of the premise of our entire series, which is the Bible is a single book. And it's got this central outline that we learn about in Genesis chapter 12, which are the promises, book of Genesis, 5 of them in 12, and then a couple more later in Genesis. But there are these 7 promises that God made to Abraham. And we go through them here. And the first of the 3 are actually fulfilled in the book of Genesis. And we see that 4, 5, and 6, and the 7th are actually articulated here on the outline. But does anybody remember what the first 3 promises are that were actually fulfilled in the book of Genesis? Anybody want to take a crack at answering that? Anybody? Bueller?
His son.
Okay, so that's the 7th promise that we see here.
Shoot. Yeah.
Yep, for sure. Absolutely. That is the 7th promise that we see. What were the first 3? Yeah, Debbie, if you want, you got to unmute though.
Isn't it that he would make nations for him?
So the great nation is the 4th promise. Again,
Oh.
4, 5, 6, and 7 are on the outline. So I'm asking what the first 3 are, which are the ones that are not actually listed on the outline. Yeah, Celeste. But that was good because that's one of the 7. Absolutely, Debbie.
So make your name great.
3.
And bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. That's the bless, curse, curse. That's 3 of them.
That's
There's
true.
2
Well,
of them.
bless, curse is a single promise.
Yeah, so that's 2 of them.
And make your name great is a promise.
What in between there? Which
What
one?
is the first promise? It's the very first promise he makes to Abraham in Genesis chapter 12.
A promised land.
No, that's 4th.
I will
bless you. He says, I will bless you. I will make your name great. Then he says, I'll bless those who bless you, curse those who curse.
Yes.
And then the great nation, which we see fulfilled throughout the book of Exodus. And then in Joshua, we see them go into the promised land. And then we see in 1st and 2nd Samuel that the king's promise is fulfilled. We see that further fulfilled, but then fallen in the 1st and 2nd Kings that we reviewed on Sunday. And then ultimately, it's all leading up to the 7th promise. I don't know who chimed in earlier. I couldn't see who that was, but they reminded us that the entire world, all nations will be blessed through Abraham. And we all know that as the messianic promise that we'll see fulfilled in upcoming lessons in the book of Acts and the book of Luke. So Kurt mentioned when he said Aaron's going to do the next 4 lessons, Aaron gets sort of the downer time. I didn't realize how true that was. Kurt got to do all the cool stuff and all the fulfillment of the promises and all the upside. And I get to go, Israel fell. Now the prophets are pulling people's hair out. And then, all that stuff. And then he's going to come back in and bring us home with Jesus and the kingdom fulfilled in Acts. So I'm like, Kurt, that was kind of uncool. Sort of this, I sort of get the, it's like a reverse order. I get like the, the creamy center would be the cool, but I get like the cookie in the middle and the creamy centers are on each side and Kurt gets to do all the creamy center stuff. But that's fair. I'll take it. It's good. But this is the challenging stuff. So this is the premise of what we've been learning. And is the tracking of the 6th promise, which is that the kings would come. Kurt lists off several scriptures. It's almost a whole page that outlines that, where it came from, how they were fulfilled. And of course, we studied that in depth in our lesson on 1st and 2nd Samuel And then we saw it in 1st and 2nd Kings in the first part of Solomon's life. And then after Solomon abandoned God for foreign gods because of the influence of his foreign wives, we see the fall of Israel, the divide, and then ultimately they're sent off into captivity. So that's the downfall of the kings. If you're on page 2, it's just a reminder that God warned them. He said, listen, I'm going to send you this king and you got to keep obeying. In Deuteronomy 17, we saw that in our quiz. He gave specific things. He said, don't do this. Don't chase after horses. Don't go back into Egypt. He gave like 4 or 5 very specific things that he did not want the kings to do. Don't chase after wealth, and don't make foreign alliances with foreign women. And Solomon failed every one of them. But the worst one was the alliances with the foreign wives, because they led him away from God. So he disobeyed by marrying these foreign women, but he worsened it by allowing them to lead him away from the God of his covenant, the God of his father David, and ultimately led him into pursuing worship of foreign gods, which became this albatross on Israel's back for the next 20 generations as they continue to fall into this pattern of worshiping foreign gods. And we see in 1 Kings 11, God finally confronts Solomon, and that's what much of the lesson was about on Sunday. And that led to the divided kingdom. We talked about that on Sunday, how the kingdom became divided because of Solomon's sin. And there were these about 20 generations of kings, about 20 kings of Israel and 20 kings of Judah over the next few generations. And of the northern kingdom, which was Israel, 20 out of 20 did evil in the eyes of the Lord. I mean, they didn't have one guy that they could stand up and say, you know what? He did the right thing. In Judah, which was the southern kingdom, which is where Jerusalem is, they at least had 8 out of 12, but that's still only a third. Only a third of the kings did right in the eyes of the Lord. The rest all did evil. And specifically, this evil is defined as worshiping foreign gods. It got so bad that they were bringing in the temple of God, they were bringing idols from these foreign gods. They were sacrificing children. It got really, really bad. And finally, God said, that's it. That's enough. And we see that first, the northern kingdom, Israel, is attacked by the Assyrians. And then they move on down. They're heading into Judah. And that's where we saw on Sunday the story of Hezekiah, who turned and prayed for a time to be added to his life. But most importantly, he wanted to lead Judah and Jerusalem to fight off the Assyrians. And then it took another 100 years before they were ultimately taken into captivity by the next sort of generation of the Babylonians. So it was the Assyrians were conquered, but it's all the Medes and Persians. It's all it's like the Middle East today. They're all fighting each other all the time. That's how it was back then. And then the last page is a list of the kings of Israel and the kings of Judah. So the kings basically starting from the divided kingdom. And Kurt and I went around like, should we include this? And the reason I wanted everybody to have this, I found this image on Google is all it is. But I think it helps you understand how visually to see that Judah was given an extra almost over 100 years before they were conquered because they tried to do right. I mean, it demonstrates to me the patience of God, because this is 200 years of Israel just rebelling. And God doesn't come in one day and say, you know what, you messed up, you're done. He gave them time. He sent prophets. He kept trying. And the same thing with Judah. And I think that's a great lesson for me that, yes, God has expectations. God has called me to follow and obey, but he wants so desperately for me to succeed that he's going to give me resources. He's going to send prophets. He's going to give me time. And I think that this timeline visually demonstrates that. So hopefully you get something from that. So that's our handout. If you have any questions, call Kurt. At this point, Patty's going to share just kind of what she's been getting from the series so far, and then we'll continue with our lesson.
Yeah, I love this study because I feel like it has just reminded me how amazing the Bible is. And when I take time to really study it and look into it, you see all of these pieces all fit together. And I feel like every time I go through this study, more things just click for me. And it makes me go, wow, everybody needs this. Like everybody in the world needs to know this about the Bible. And, you know, I've seen how God just repeats his promises over and over, and not just that he repeats them, but he fulfills them, every single one of them. And not just the 7 promises that he made to Abraham, but all the promises that he makes. And he comes through for his people. And, you know, I see that in the scripture, but I also see it as I look back through my own life as a disciple and going through, you know, a lot of different challenges, whether it's health challenges or financial or, you know, people who I love dying. As I look back, I see God's been faithful to me through all of those things. And I think of that one lesson that Kurt gave about how we have to store up the rocks in our head. And, you know, I need to keep those rocks in my head and stay in the Bible, because both of those things are what give me the faith to persevere through challenges I'm going through right now, but even greater challenges that I believe will come in the future. So that's all for me.
Amen. Thank you for sharing, Patty. I think we all can relate, especially to having rocks in our head. I've known that about myself for years, but for Kurt to point it out to everyone was very helpful. We're going to go ahead and just do a fun poll question. Remember, we've had our actual quiz, so this is no pressure. Some of these questions don't have right or wrong answers. These are more like get to know you kind of fun questions. So we'll do the first one just to kind of break the ice here a little bit. Okay. So last week we learned that everybody are big movie fans. So which of the following types of movies would you prefer to watch more than any other? If your favorite category, if it is documentary, and it's not on here, I'm sorry. Pick from these 5. You know, which is your favorite category? Are you drama, comedy, action, adventure, horror, science fiction, fantasy? Need a couple more folks to chime in, and then we'll close out the poll. Just waiting for a couple more answers. Okay. So it looks like the vast majority love action adventure, but we had a nice split beyond that. Comedy, you know, drama, obviously. Very few people like horror. Probably Scott Mojica is my guess, but I'm not 100% sure about that. And then obviously the science fiction fantasy. So excellent. So we get to know each other a little bit, have a good time, and dig into our content. So last Sunday, we were learning about 1st and 2nd Kings, and at the end of our lesson, we found that the kingdom had fallen. Both the northern kingdom had fallen 100 years before, and then 100 years later, the southern kingdom finally fell, the Babylonians. And then we have this period of time where the Israelites, and you know, I use that term broadly, meaning the entire kingdom of Israel, both northern and southern, are all in exile in either, you know, in parts of other parts of the Persian Empire. And during this time, it wasn't as though God were silent. We're skipping ahead now to when they return. But during this time, we find the book of Daniel is written. We find the book of Ezekiel, or at least the content of the timeline of what occurred in the book of Daniel occurred during that timeline. It may have been written later, but it accounts for things that occurred during that time of captivity, as well as the book of Ezekiel. So there were things that were occurring. God was continuing to call out to his people. He didn't just leave them in captivity and say, see you, wouldn't want to be you. He said, okay, you're in captivity, but I am still your God. So he's the God of the promise, even when challenges are happening. He's the God of the promise, even in the midst of discipline. He never ceases to, and I think sometimes we get confused about that. We think, well, a loving God wouldn't do this, or God never stopped loving the Israelites. He never has, he never will. God never stops loving, but sometimes there is discipline. And even during the midst of discipline, God loves his children. if you're a parent, you really understand this concept. There are times that we have to discipline our children and we don't like it, and we do it because we love them. But you don't love them less because they're in the midst of a tantrum or they're in the midst of disobeying. And, many of you know Max and some of his challenges, and, he's having a great time at home right now. But if he has a bad day, I don't love him less because he's breaking something or, punching a hole in the wall or breaking another computer. I don't love him less. It's just we have to deal with that. And that's how God is with us. And I think sometimes we forget. We look at things like, well, only if good things are happening is God, that's God's favor. That's not true. God loves the folks even in the midst of these challenges. I want to look at a couple scriptures in the book of Isaiah. Isaiah was a contemporary to Hezekiah, so this was written before the exile. In Isaiah chapter 44, remember on midweeks we make you read your own Bible. We don't spoon feed the scriptures in this PowerPoint, so we make you work for it a little bit. But if you don't know where Isaiah is, just go to your Bible app and it just lists the books. You can't miss it. If you have a regular paper Bible, you just kind of open it just a little right in the middle. If you have my exact version, it's page 1040 in the Bible. But Isaiah chapter 44 and verse 28, he says, "Who says of Cyrus, he is my shepherd, and I will accomplish all that I please. He will say of Jerusalem, let it be rebuilt, and of the temple, let its foundations be laid." Now, I want you to make note of a couple things. Isaiah is talking about how you're going to go into captivity, things are going to be bad. And then he says, but I'm going to tell this guy Cyrus to rebuild, and it will, so the Jerusalem and the temple can be rebuilt. That's going to become important in a minute, but keep in mind that this was written about 200 years before the time of the events that take place in the book of Ezekiel. So about 200 years earlier, Isaiah is writing this, and he says again in in chapter 45, verse 1, "This is what the Lord says to his anointed. So Cyrus was whose right hand I take hold of, to subdue nations before him, to strip kings of their armor, to open doors before him, so the gates will not be shut." And then in verse 13, "I will raise up Cyrus in my righteousness. I will make all his ways straight. He will rebuild my city and set my exiles free, but not for a price or a reward, says the Lord Almighty." So again, a couple hundred years before the events of the book of Ezra, we see God talking through Isaiah about how he's going to rebuild Jerusalem, how he's going to rebuild the city is through some guy named Cyrus. So if you look in Ezra chapter 1, Ezra chapter 1 and verse 1, "In the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah, the Lord moved the heart of Cyrus, king of Persia, to make a proclamation throughout his realm and also to put it in writing." This is what Cyrus, king of Persia, says. "The Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has appointed me to build a temple for him at Jerusalem and Judah. And any of his people among you may go up to Jerusalem and Judah and build the temple of the Lord, the God of Israel, the God who is in Jerusalem, and may their God be with them. And any local locality where survivors may now be living, the people are to provide them with silver and gold, with goods and livestock, and with free will offerings for the temple of the God in Jerusalem." So Isaiah, when he's prophesying about the fall of Jerusalem and he talks about it being rebuilt, he specifically says, God's going to raise up Cyrus. God's going to raise up Cyrus. And 200 years later, Cyrus takes over for Darius. Cyrus becomes king in Persia as they they conquer the Babylonians. And one of the first things he does is he decides the best way to govern is to allow people to go back to they were all pulled out of their localities by the Babylonians. He says, you know what? I want to send them all back the Persian way, if you will. I'm going to send them all back to their original homelands and let them worship their own gods. Now, they weren't self-governed. They were under Persian government, Persian governors. I'm sure they paid taxes back to Persia. But he said, listen, the best way to control these people is to let them go back to their own ways, their old customs, their own gods. And it's interesting because, from reading Isaiah that God put that on his heart. God established that 200 years before the guy was even born, that that's how God was going to restore Israel. But specifically, Ezra refers to a scripture in Jeremiah chapter 51. So let's look at that really quick. In Jeremiah 51 and verse 11, sharpen the arrows, take up the shields. The Lord has stirred up the kings of the Medes because his purpose to destroy Babylon. The Lord will take vengeance for his temple. So again, Isaiah spoke about this not quite as far back as Jeremiah spoke about this not quite as far back as Isaiah, but certainly well before the time that it happened, reminding them that not only is, yes, Jerusalem is going to fall. Yes, we are going to fall into the hands of our enemies, but God has a plan to restore. And the best place in the Bible where Jeremiah articulates this is a very famous scripture. We read it all the time in some of our study series. It's kind of out of context the way we use it, but I think the spirit is still the same. This is actually in context tonight, the original context. In Jeremiah chapter 29, starting in verse 10, he says, this is what the Lord says. Now, just keep in mind that Jeremiah has just prophesied about the fall of Judah. He said, listen, Israel already fell. You guys are next. You're not repenting. And remember, we learned on Sunday, the king later came in and sliced up the scriptures and threw them in the fire. I mean, this is all happening contemporaneously, right? And he says, this is what the Lord says. When 70 years are completed for Babylon, now keep that in mind. He says, when 70 years, I mean, so specific. When 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will come to you and fulfill my good promise to bring you back to this place. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you, not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. Then you will call on me and I'll come and pray to me and I'll listen to you. You'll seek me and you'll find me when you seek me with all of your heart. I will be found by you, declares the Lord. I will bring you back from captivity. I will gather you from the nations and places where I banished you, declares the Lord, and will bring you back to the place from which I carried you into exile. So Jeremiah, in the midst of being the prophet everyone hated because he kept talking about how we're going to get conquered, specifically says, you know what? And when it happens, you're going to be there 70 years. And then after 70 years, Babylon will get conquered and then somebody's got to send us back. 70 years, boom, and we come back. And it's interesting, if you look at a timeline, it's right at 70 years that we find the book of Ezra beginning, where we were looking before. So about 70 years later, we see Cyrus sending the people back into Jerusalem. And I think the reason this is important is sometimes we look at all these things in the Bible, particularly the Old Testament, is a little more intimidating to us as Christians. And we sort of are like, well, yeah, all this stuff was said and who knows what it meant. But if you slow down and think about it in terms of this chronology, in terms of the timeline, it's amazing. It's amazing. Isaiah saying, hey, we're going down to the Assyrians, but God is going to raise up this guy named Cyrus who's going to bring us back. Jeremiah says to Hezekiah, listen, we're going down. It says to Jeroboam, we're going down. We're going to get conquered, but only 70 years. And then God is going to restore us and bring us back. And 70 years later, it's almost to the day, God says, okay, time to go back. Time for me to raise up a new king. Time for me to raise up Cyrus that I predicted a while back and let you guys come back into Jerusalem, come back into Zion. It's amazing. It's mind-boggling. And it raises my faith because we also know there are a lot of messianic prophecies in the book of Isaiah. There are a lot of messianic prophecies throughout the Old Testament, particularly in the prophets. A lot of these prophecies have dual meanings, right? They have an immediate meaning and they have a messianic meaning. And it just raises my faith. It increases my faith in God that when he said it, he meant it, and he's followed through. God fulfills his promises, but God is sovereign in the nations. God is sovereign in the nations, and he said this to people who, think about this, we're going to go into captivity for 70 years. That's over a generation. They would be in captivity. I'm sure that wasn't pleasant. I'm sure it wasn't like fine dining and, vacations every night. It was imprisonment for the royalty. It was indentured servitude / slavery for the rest of the folks. And yet God was still sovereign, even in the midst of their challenges. And I think for me, that's really comforting because I know tough times can hit, tough times can happen, but God is never out of control. God is always in control, even in the midst of some of these challenges. And then just for your reference, I would look at Psalm 126, which is the famous psalm when the Lord brought back the captive to Zion. They were like people who dreamed, our young men had vision, our old men dreamed dreams. These are incredible images of what their feeling was as they were brought back out of this captivity after 70 years. And then we get to actually the book of Ezra, which is our topic for this evening, which we're starting with 14 minutes to go. But we'll get through it. We will, because it's top level. Most of the content, a lot of the outline, a lot of the lessons from Ezra are repeated in Nehemiah, which is going to be our lesson on Sunday. So you won't get shortchanged, even if we have to blaze through a bit of Ezra. But to keep us kind of focused and to make sure that Steve's been yawning a lot, so to make sure he doesn't fall asleep, let's do one more poll here. Let's look at another poll. Okay. So this is just another get to know you. If you could sit down to dinner with an Old Testament figure, one who's listed below, which one would it be? Now, I know there's a lot more people in the Old Testament, so you got to pick from these 5. And that's assuming that they weren't like decomposing, like they were actually there with you in person, could talk to you and all that stuff. All right, 5 more seconds. This is interesting. This is a pretty good split. 24% for Moses, 21 Elijah, 17 Esther, 17 David, 21 Daniel. So we got a pretty good split there. That's actually quite interesting and exciting. And maybe we'd all get that opportunity, then we could meet together and talk about what we learned from each of those folks. So that'd be pretty cool. Okay, so we see at the beginning of Ezra, this is 70 years after they were taken into captivity. Zerubbabel, Cyrus sends Zerubbabel back to, along with about 50,000 folks, and he is sent back to restore the temple. Specifically, he's sent back to restore the temple and restore temple worship. So the first thing he does is he rebuilds the altar in chapter 3. That's not the full temple, but he understood that's the heart of the temple. The heart of worship is the altar. And we talked a little about that on Sunday. We don't build a literal altar to God anymore. We don't have everything in the Old Testament is a spiritual, it's kind of a shadow of things to come. And there are spiritual parallels of the physical to the spiritual. And we build a figurative altar in our lives. And, we talked about on Sunday when Elijah went down in the temple and the altar was in ruins. And that's what happened. Here's Zerubbabel comes back up. Of course it was in ruins. It had been completely destroyed. So he had to start from scratch and build the altar. Chapter 3, verses 1 and 2. When the 7th month came and the Israelites had settled in their own towns, the people assembled together as one in Jerusalem. Then Josiah, son of Jozadak, and his fellow priests, and Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, and his associates began to build the altar of God to sacrifice burnt offerings on it in accordance with what was written in the law of Moses, the man of God. So the first thing they did was establish, we got to rebuild our altar. And for us, that's the focus. That's got to be the heart we have, building an altar every day. Get up in the morning, I'm going to build an altar. I'm going to read my Bible. Oh, I'm so busy. Oh, I got to go to work. Oh, I got to get on my Zoom meetings. Oh, I got to, go run errands, or I got to double mask or whatever. Don't slow down and build your altar. Go out and pray. Build your altar. There may be times in your life when you need to take a time and just take a step back and fast. These things that we call in, this school of thought, we call it spiritual formation, right? These things, prayer, Bible study, fasting, evangelism. These are all the things that mold and shape us. These are all elements of our altar. These are all stones in our altar, and we have to rebuild. And then later in chapter 3, they focus on rebuilding the temple. And it's interesting because it talks about they started to rebuild it. They faced opposition, which is chapters 4 and 5. And then they finally finished it. And we think, okay, that must have been a couple weeks. It was 20 years from the time that they started to build the temple until the time that they finished it. Now, granted, they didn't have like, backhoes and dump trucks and cement mixers like we have now, but still 20 years is a long time. And as the video that we watched pointed out, it was a shadow even of the temple that Solomon had built in terms of its glory. But they were fired up to have a temple. But again, because of these things that happened, there was opposition. And this idea of God sending them and then opposition, and then they face success. And then, as I think the video also pointed out, sort of half-hearted success is the pattern we see repeated with Zerubbabel, with Ezra, and again with Nehemiah. Because I think what we find is that God is setting up the people for the seventh promise. He's recognizing there is still more to come. There is still more to the story than just the altar. And then Ezra comes on the scene in chapter 7, and we'll pick that up in chapter 7, verse 1. And his job is to restore the priesthood, restore the law. In chapter 7, now this is not like, they're not contemporaries. Zerubbabel came in, it's like several years, it's actually several decades later when Ezra comes, but it's the same pattern. He's sent by Artaxerxes. Well, let's just read it, it'll be quicker. Verse 1. After these things, during the reign of Artaxerxes, king of Persia, Ezra, son of Sariah, the son of Azariah, the son of Hilkiah, the son of Shallum, the son of Zadok, the son of Ahitub, the son of Amariah, the son of Hizariah, the son of the son of Zerahiah, the son of Uzai, the son of Buki, the son of Abishua, the son of Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the chief priest. This Ezra came up from Babylon. You're like, Aaron, you can't even pronounce those names. Why'd you take the time to read them? Because it's in here for a reason. It's in the scriptures for a reason, to show God, even in the midst of Babylonian captivity, was able to maintain the line of his priesthood. And we know he's able to maintain the line of Judah, the Davidic kingdom, ultimately we see fulfilled in Jesus. So, but God reestablishes his priesthood, and that's not just for the sake of leadership. It's actually for the sake of the people, turning the people back to God. This Ezra came up from Babylon. He was a teacher well versed in the law of Moses, which the Lord, the God of Israel, had given. The king had granted him everything he asked, for the hand of the Lord God was on him. Some of the Israelites, including priests, Levites, musicians, gatekeepers, temple servants, also came up to Jerusalem in the 7th year of King Artaxerxes. In verse 10, for Ezra had devoted himself to the study and observance of the law of the Lord, and to teaching its decrees and laws in Israel. And I think the thing that's encouraging for me is that even in the midst, again, of captivity and all these challenges and generational challenges, there were still people that were devoted to the law of the Lord. There were still people who were devoted to teaching the law of the Lord. And it all almost looks lost, right? They've been taken away from that promised land. They've been put into servitude. They're getting flung into communities where there's intermixing and intermingling and all kinds of challenges where it could have diluted their convictions. And somehow through this Levitical line, Ezra is able to maintain his deep convictions, but she's then able to pass on to the folks. She's then able to pass on to the people. In Ezra chapter 9, again, the video outlines this quite a bit. Ezra is, well, let's just go ahead and reread this because I think it's important as set up for Sunday. In Ezra chapter 9, in verse 1, after these things had been done, the leaders came to me and said, the people of Israel, including the priests and Levites, have not kept themselves separate from the neighboring peoples with their detestable practices like those of the Canaanites, Hittites, Perizzites, Jebusites, Ammonites, Moabites, Egyptians, and Amorites. They have taken some of their daughters as wives for themselves and the sons, and they have mingled the holy race with peoples around them. And the leaders and officials have led the way in unfaithfulness. When I heard this, I tore my tunic and cloak. I pulled my hair from my head and beard, and I sat down appalled. Then everyone who trembled at the words of the God of Israel gathered around me because of the unfaithfulness of the exiles, and I sat there appalled until the evening sacrifice. So I think what's interesting, and even in the video, he almost dismisses this as though it wasn't a big deal. Why does Ezra react this way? I don't agree. I like a lot of the video, don't get me wrong, but I don't agree with that. I do think Ezra was appalled for a reason. Now, again, was this the only sin going on in Israel at the time? Of course not. Why does this, of all things, appall him so much? He was appalled because of what we learned on Sunday. The entire fall, the entire casting out of Israel into captivity originated because Solomon married foreign women, 700 of them, and then followed their gods. And he's like, are you new here? Can you learn what is going on? Why are you following and repeating this same pattern that led us into captivity, that destroyed our faith, nearly destroyed our peoples? Why are you repeating the same pattern over and over and over again? And that is why Ezra was appalled. That is why Ezra sat there appalled. That is why he took such drastic measures to address this issue in Israel. And then Ezra also does a public reading of the law, which actually is documented in the book of Nehemiah. And we're going to talk more about that on Sunday. Ezra and Nehemiah were contemporaries. So Nehemiah starts to rebuild the wall, which is going to be most of our lesson on Sunday. But as part of that dedication, Ezra actually stands in public and reads the law. And we'll get more into that on Sunday's lesson so that we understand this. I think the biggest takeaway so far, and we'll get again more of this, Ezra and Nehemiah are sister books, but the biggest takeaway is that God continues to keep his promises. He kept his promises to Abraham, and even when the people, remember the promise was always a covenant promise, meaning I'm going to do these things, but you got to do your part. When the people fell short, God didn't instantly punish them. He gave them generations, and finally he said, okay, that's it. But even now he's restoring them. He's saying, I'm still going to give you the promise. I'm going to continue to keep my promise to Abraham. I'm going to continue to keep my promise that I made to David. And honestly, he made the promises through the prophets that we talked about. The promise that Cyrus is going to fix this down the road, not directly, but through his leadership, that it'll be 70 years that you'll be in captivity. We see God's sovereignty over time, God's sovereignty over the nations. God is always in control. And I know for me, sometimes I feel like the elements of my life can get out of control. I don't know if you've ever felt that way, but when elements of my life are feeling out of control, it's kind of like what Patty said when she shared. I've got to slow down and go back to those rocks in my head, go back to those anchor scriptures, go back to those things that I know to be true, those moments in time where I've seen God move in incredible ways in my life, and know that that's the same God that I'm serving even through times of challenges. And God is in control even in the midst of opposition. We see the opposition that they faced to the building of the temple. We'll see the opposition on Sunday to the rebuilding of the wall. God is still in control, even though the folks are facing opposition. And ultimately, God is setting the table for us to fulfill the seventh promise. So that's our lesson tonight on the book of Ezra. As I said, we're going to continue on Sunday with the book of Nehemiah. And then next Wednesday night, we're going to have kind of a wrapping up of the Old Testament and the Intertestament times, talking about the prophets and talking about things that occurred in the timeline between the testaments. And again, really set the table for Kurt to bring us home in 2 weeks with the book of Luke and then the book of Acts. So that